Hello and welcome to another video tutorial brought to you by Rysight Studios. Visit us on the web at rysight.com. That's rysight.com. So, if you ever saw a sunset and queried why it was so interesting to you, and maybe the fact that the day is not just ended, but why those colors are so enriching, there's actually some science behind that, and that's the science of color. So we're going to get right into two different color mixes from the cyan, magenta, and yellow, black, CMYK, and the RGBs. So I set this up in Illustrator to understand what those are. CMYK stand for cyan, yellow, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Obviously, they just used the K on black because B was taken for blue. These colors, these four colors, are the four most important colors in printing and any type of kind of maximum output. The reason is that when you take cyan and combine it with magenta, you get a certain different color mixes. See? The same with the yellows and the magentas and CLs, blah, blah, blah. When these are mixed together, they create the entire color spectrum. So, why not, I thought we learned that yellow and blue created green. Well, I guess it does. What about this magenta? Where's the red? Well, the red's when you combine them to the yellow. So that's that. Now the RGB is actually very interesting too, because when you combine these colors, they create a special color mix too. Now red, green, and blue, when you talk about that color mix, it's with light. And my example of that is the Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon. When you shoot white light into a prism and it bends it, it creates the entire color spectrum. You can see that there's our cyan and our yellow and our green and our red. I guess they didn't want to put magenta in. Purple was more appealing apparently. But you can see that this white light actually creates color when it's refracted in different ways. And that's how that works. So, again, refreshing on the basics. CMYK, these guys right here, create every color with ink and paint. RGB, together, when they're shooting in light, create every color using light. Now let's get an idea of the combinations. So we have our yellow, right? And we take our yellow and we put it with our cyan. Look what happens. We get green. We take our magenta and we put it with our cyan. We get blue. And magically, there's red. The other thing is that when we put all three together, we get black. Now, why don't we just always mix the three colors together and always get black? Here's the reason why. Cyan, magenta, yellow are made up of certain elements that are a little bit more expensive when used all three together to create black. Think of all newspapers and all the black newspaper text in there. It's expensive if we did it that way. So they created another compound that creates our blacks. So that's interesting on that one. Again, this is ink. This is paint. This is goopy stuff. Let's think about light. Let's bring this down here. If I take a red flashlight and shine it onto a green flashlight, we're actually going to create yellow. And I guess we all can guess the rest of them. We get magenta when we go red to blue, and we get cyan when we go blue to green, and believe it or not, when they're all together, we get white. That's because when all the colors are together and light, we get white. What's black, though? Black is nothing. Black is the lack of color altogether. So we think at night, there's just no light. So there's no white. That means there's absolutely no color. And that's the mixing. That's really it. Now we have another interesting thing with these mixes that opens up some magical doors. Let's pull back our sunset picture. And there it is. Why is this so appealing? Well, I'll tell you one of the reasons is because there's complementary colors. There is actually orange and blue. You know, we have our orange and we have our blues. And because these colors are actually complement colors, they look great together. So you ever see an orange and blue tie? Why does it look so good? Because the two colors, they complement each other. They make things look better. So let's look at a couple other complements. Red and cyan, cyan come together to make a beautiful complementary color. Now, maybe these aren't the best looking colors, I agree, but they do complement each other. So you could take an element of that and tone it down, and then do the opposite toning percentages on your red, and then you get some very, very pretty colors, or good colors, or however you want to call it. Now, how do we come up with this? There's a very simple way to understand this. When I take my mixes and put them next to each other, take our black, and now we understand what black is. These two, when together, bam and bam, cyan and red, these are complementaries. Magenta and green, yellow and blue. So remember your RGB and your CMYK, because you can always use that CMYK/RGB little phrase, RGB, CMYK, to remember your complement colors. And that's that on color. Now let's look at color not in the solid form, but when it's actually in a photo. And here's a bunch of colors, and this has been converted into CMYK. And we're going to talk later on about RGB to CMYK. When I turn off the cyan plate, look at how different the image comes. I turn off the magenta plate, again different, and we turn off the yellow plate, again. This is only black. That's the only black in this image. Now this is going to be a little confusing, but when I actually turn on the cyan plate, see it's gray? Well, think of it like this. I can't show you the actual all the cyan unless it's showing the mix. That's just a programmatical limitation, so don't sweat it too much. But if you look at it, everything that you see in front of you is what would be covered in cyan. So basically whatever is gray and black would be a shade of cyan. So we mix them together. We just mix cyan and magenta together. Look what we get. It's not appealing. Now we mix cyan, magenta, and yellow. Still not appealing, but it's a better image. Turn off that yellow and turn it on. We need our black. You need the black, and that's where all the shades and the shadows come in. And that's the different plates of CMYK. Now let's look at how that image, I have to go into Photoshop for this one, became. Here's the original RGB image. Okay. Now, when I take a picture of my digital camera, it takes it in RGB. Now in front of us we have a CCD chip, CMOS chip, or however you want to call it. This is what's inside a digital camera. This is what replaced film. Okay. Now, as you can see, I'm going to get a little closer to it. It consists of, actually, this is kind of a funny representation, but it consists of this times like a couple thousand. So you can see this is probably a really low resolution picture. But basically, we have our blue, you can kind of see it, our red, and our green. And I'll find you a better image. Oops. So again, we have our CCD chip. So what happens is when you take your picture, it just senses what's blue, what's green, and what's red, and it just burns that, tells the file what ones to turn on. And when you do that, you create your image like this. So let's zoom in and see if we can't find our pixels. We'll find some water here and go in real close. Now, these pixels aren't necessarily CMYK. These are actually mixes, RGB. These are mixes of red, green, and blue to create these particular pixels. And what they did was, this particular chip here spoke to each other, and they said, well, this part of the picture needs this mix of green, red, and blue to create that pixel in that spot. You see, it didn't have to think very hard on who was in this spot, because it was just, give us blues. And here it's, give us yellows. And here it was, give us whites. And that's that. And that is how it comes in. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to it, but that basic understanding. And that's how we get our digital pictures. Now, let's go past that from our camera to our computer, but now we're going to have to create, we want this to get into a magazine. Now, what happens is, as you know, our printers come with ink. And our printer's ink consists of, again, CMYK. So the best thing to do if you don't want to print right from our RGB is to know what's going to happen to our image is to convert it. Now here's a preview of what a CMYK image looks like after it's converted from RGB. The colors get very flat. You see how it's not very appealing anymore? You can see the hat's not as blue, and you know, the water's not as rich. That's what happens when you convert RGB to CMYK, because it no longer has light shooting through it to create rich images. So that's important to realize that, especially when you're expecting something to come out and it doesn't come out the way you thought of it. Alright, so I think we have an understanding now, and I've reiterated several things. So in follow-up, let's remember our mixes, CMYK and RGB. Remember, RGB is what we use when we're thinking about color and light, and CMYK is what we think of when we think of color and ink. Thank you again for watching another video tutorial brought to you by RiSight Studios. We hope that you would enjoy our video tutorials, and feel free to download some more as we learn more things. We like to share them with you, and that's it for today. Thanks again.